It's great to be back in CURF. I think this is the third time I've given a talk at CURF. It's always great to be invited. I must have said something useful at the previous two occasions. When I was here in the previous two occasions, I was in a different role. I was the Chief Executive of the National Capital Authority, a very different role from the role I'm in. And it's great to be in a role where I can now candidly say there's political will to do things and there's money to do things, which is not something I could say about the NCA. So it's great to be in an organisation which is going to be part of the ongoing transformation of Canberra. My talk tonight is going to be in two parts. I'm going to first introduce you to the City Renewal Authority, who we are and what we're charged with doing, and then I'm probably going to get a bit serious and talk about what, in my view, are the key success factors for urban renewal, probably across all Australian cities, drawing upon my nearly 44 years of experience as a planner and urban designer, but also what I think is going to be relevant to the challenges facing Canberra. So who are we? We're just over a year old. We're a new statutory authority. We were formed in conjunction with the Suburban Land Agency under the Single Act, and we came into being on 1 July. We have a governing board who report directly to the Minister, in this case the Chief Minister, who also happens to be the Treasurer, which is helpful, if I could say that. In creating the agency, the government looked around at different models around Australia, and it chose to create a small and agile organisation. We're only 25 people, but we're an agency which is charged with the ability to go out and get the best ideas, to draw upon people from outside Canberra to join with us in our challenge. The Act talks about the importance of us being an agency which I call people-centric. People-centric in the sense that it's very important that we deliver the urban renewal effort through strong engagement. There'd been criticism by the Canberra community of how perhaps consultation had been done previously. And this government is committed to new ways of community participation, new ways of engaging, and certainly that was enshrined within our legislation. Active community involvement is critical to renewal, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Also part of our DNA was that we were to be design-led, and that sits very comfortably with me as someone who has strong design interests and as a design practitioner. But certainly urban design very much at the forefront of both our thinking, but in terms of also our delivery. We are a doing agency. We are not a policy arm of government. We're an agency charged by government to get on and do things. And so we take a lead from existing policies, but in terms of our deployment and execution, design is very much part of our thinking. We're tasked with coordinating the urban renewal effort, and we're tasked with that in a particular precinct, and I'll come back and talk about that in a moment. We are charged, as I said a moment ago, with promoting urban design excellence. It's an incredible and important part of Canberra's DNA. As someone who started his planning career in Canberra more than 38 years ago with the NCDC, and to understand at that time a new national capital being planned and designed, I was deeply involved in listening and understanding how that agency, pre-self-government, went about the task of building a new city. The task of renewing the city is a similar kind of challenge, but it requires equally, very importantly, design capability. And fundamentally, we're also about making the city centre precinct a more attractive and lively place. And again, I'll talk more about that. These two statements, I guess, best reflect and encapsulate what the Act says we have to do. And there are key words there which I've highlighted, which perhaps marks us as being different from perhaps other agencies that have gone before us. What's now important is that we do have to deliver revenue to government. We have to recognise that in transacting public land, we have to realise a dividend in the way in which we take that land to market, how we develop that land. But fundamentally, the Act also talks about the importance of social and environmental sustainability. So this is much more about the long game. And that's so important to the way we work. It's the ability for us as an agency to combine all of the different dimensions that make Renewal successful. I'm very grateful to have a really top board. Many of the members, in fact 6, are not from Canberra. One is Chris Folkes, who also happens to be on the board of the National Capital Authority. And that was a deliberate decision by government to make sure that the working arrangements between the National Capital Authority and the CRA were very close. And I can confidently say after 12 months that that relationship has formed very well. It's helpful, of course, that I have been on that other side, but it's also very important that the information, the collaboration that we can undertake with the National Planning Agency is there, and that is working very well. But amongst the other board members, not just because many of them have initials after their name, these are very experienced people, people with global experience, whether they're property lawyers, property advisors, valuers, architects, landscape architects, cultural planners. All of these skills are available to my agency from this board. A very experienced board, and one that's already adding enormous value to the way in which we're working. That was, I think, on their very first day, where they were given a tour around Canberra on a balmy Canberra winter's day. The Act defines the area that we operate in, and it's a relatively small area, 415 hectares in total. It's 7 kilometres from north to south, so from Exhibition Park in the north, or Canberra Winery if you want to get more specific, running south along the Northbourne Avenue corridor, widening out, flaring out to pick up Dixon Group Centre, and then down through Northbourne, picking up the blocks either side of Northbourne Avenue, extending out again to pick up Hague Park, such an important public space asset, through to the city centre, or civic as I like to refer to it and should be referred to, and then right through to the lake, and the opportunity to reimagine the relationship to the lake and the relationship particularly to the east on Constitution Avenue. It is the epicentre of Canberra's urban transformation. This is where significant changes are already evident and visible through increases in density, but more importantly, increases in the diversity of those places. The approach we're taking is a combination of both a spatial as well as, if you like, typological approach. In that corridor, there are of course existing places, existing neighbourhoods which have their own distinctive identity. And we think this is a fairly logical spatial, I guess, differentiation of the different neighbourhoods within which we work. And you can read the descriptors that are there. But each of those places, we think, have within them very specific urban renewal challenges. It enables us in going back to government with our business cases and propositions around the things we need to do, that we can operate in those kinds of, within those types of neighbourhood units. You might draw those boundaries differently because everyone has a different mental map of Canberra, but we think this is the most logical arrangement by which we can pick up everything that's foreshadowed, particularly along the Northbourne Avenue corridor, and where we can also pick up the opportunities that are already emerging in relation to civic and the city centre, whether that be a new UNSW campus, whether that be around the exciting changes that ANU are making, whether that be around the City Hill precinct, the cultural precinct, and in the retail core itself. Our strategic goals can be summarised in those 4 statements. I've talked about design-led urban renewal, about the importance of creating high-quality places, about partnering with the community in the way in which we both design, conceive and deliver our program, the importance of supporting stronger economic sustainability. Fundamentally, urban renewal is fundamentally about economic revitalisation. This is about shifting perceptions about Canberra as a place for attracting inward investment. And that's an important task. But at the same time, if you take this triple bottom line approach that I talked about earlier, it's also about creating communities, stronger communities. It's also about recognising that we have to do it environmentally in a very sustainable way. We should be, as a government agency, not just saying do as we do, but not doing as we say, but doing as we do. And so it's so important as I've recognised through a long career, that in government you need to lead by example. And so a lot of our work is going to be about applying best practice or even leading next practice approaches to the way in which we implement our renewal program. We're looking for the best ideas, and we are already looking around, engaging with other authorities, other agencies, indeed looking at other countries and working, in fact, at this moment with an agency in California in the US who's helping us with our digital strategy. Our guiding principles are listed there, and I could describe those in detail. However, time probably means that I can't describe them at this point in detail, but rather those are the foundations on which our approach to the way in which we develop our program, to the way we implement our work, will be based. And will be measured against those principles by government and in the way in which we deliver on the promises we make on an annual basis through the statement of expectations that government gives us. Our current planning priorities are really around doing a lot of listening. The community engagement side of things, with so much of our work at the moment, is so critical. It is about putting people first. I said we're not a planning agency, but we're having to do some strategic forward thinking about the way the precinct will change. So thinking about formulating a strong view about particularly the way in which we are going to strengthen community through a neighbourhood strategy, the way in which we adopt and apply best and next practice approaches in our sustainability, which I'll again talk about. We have now become a mandatory referral authority. So we don't have planning powers, but the Directorate provides or forwards to us all development applications within the precinct for comment. Maybe not letterboxes, but certainly the devil is in the detail. And we haven't drawn a line. We've simply said, forward us all the DAs, and within the 15-day time frame that we're given, we have to provide commentary and support. Ideally, we're working collaboratively with the Planning Directorate well in advance of the formal DAs being lodged. That is the critical point at which we can influence the planning and development outcomes, the pre-application stage, where we can engage with the clients and their architects about their proposals and actually strengthen those and support them. We've also provided funding for the Capital Design Review Panel, which is a new initiative. Previously, there'd been a number of design review panels spread across a number of directorates in the ACT. The Peak Design Review Panel is now led by the government architect, Catherine, who's here tonight. Welcome, Catherine. Great to see you. And doing a fantastic job with a very talented pool or panel members who are able to come together and assess, again, ideally at the earliest possible stage, the merits of proposals before they become locked in, and we have to get into those red and blue corners which really don't result in particularly good outcomes. To achieve our vision, we've adopted a framework or a logic that says we can organise the renewal actions around the recognition of the evolution of the precinct and the way in which that transformation process occurs. It starts off modestly with what I'd call consolidation. That's about recognising that quickly, with quick wins, we can undertake a number of tactical initiatives. That moves on to enhance, which is really about initiatives that have a slightly longer to medium-term time frame. Those are ones that obviously would need to be discussed with government, that business cases are prepared for, and that government can acknowledge and support through the forward-year program. We operate on essentially a 4-year forward program. Anything beyond that, it's too difficult to look into the crystal ball. But certainly through those medium-term initiatives, we can identify incremental improvements that are going to continue to add great value to the precinct, but also leverage and improve other infrastructure investments that other directorates want to make in the precinct. So a lot of our work is collaborative, working with those other directorates to align our effort to their priorities. And it's been terrific to work with, say, the Education Directorate on the challenge they have. If approximately 20 to 30,000 more people are going to be moving into the precinct that we're responsible for managing, where are the schools? Where are the community facilities? How are we going to support this new community? And so it's been very helpful to sit down at an early stage with the Education Directorate and imagine how new types of schools, vertical schools, I had the good fortune to work on one of them in Fisherman's Bend in Melbourne, a 7-storey building, but in that school was a college, a community facility, a gym, being used 24/7, 7 days a week. And that's the kind of thinking, the kinds of, I guess, approaches that we're going to take, rather than just imagining that we've got to set aside a 10-hectare site for a school. We now have vertical schools, and those students can access the public spaces, can engage with the environment, the city environment they're in. And finally, transformative actions, what I'd call catalytic initiatives, which might be quite different from government practices, but opportunities that my board and we as an agency would want to take to government because we believe that they would have that catalytic effect. They would be bold and audacious. They'd be based in logic. They'd be based around strong business cases, but they'd be able to demonstrate a really strong proposition to government that government would be prepared to make an investment in. The 5 key place programs are listed there. Planning around a program. We need to be able to demonstrate to government that over the forward 4 years that we have a coordinated program that will achieve all of the things government wants us to do, and that will also be supported by things below, which are really around new infrastructure, around an investment in the public realm, which is so important, around the way in which we go about the land development process, which is to, again, as I said, lead by example, demonstrate best practice, undertake pilot projects that can show the public, show the community how we would approach innovative design, how we'd approach innovative delivery, and how we'd approach the ongoing maintenance of policies, for example, around affordability, around the integration of social housing, the sustainability initiatives around building performance, for example. And last but not least, place management engagement, which really relates to the way in which we take the community on the journey with us about what it is they value about their place and the way in which we can draw others into that exercise. This is not a challenge that has to be left to government alone. In fact, it can't be left to government alone. And we need to form very strong partnerships, particularly with the business sector, around events, around the opportunities they can play in animating and activating the public spaces of our city. Our sustainability program, which I'm pleased to say my board signed off last week, is to gather up all of the existing sustainability policies, plans, strategies, programs that the ACT government has, and to focus on those initiatives that these plans talk about that are relevant to the urban renewal effort, relevant to our work. And that program that we've developed will apply to 4 key principles, and those are focusing on climate-wise design, social and economic vibrancy, the sustainable use of resources, and the strong promotion of enhanced active travel. As I said earlier, we want to foster demonstration and best practice leadership. We're a doing agency, so we should be integrating this thinking, these actions in all of our work, and that's precisely what we're going to do. We've set ourselves some stretch targets, generally Code +1 targets. So in other words, we're not happy with what is standard practice in Australia. We want to go 1 star or 1+ better than that. And we think if we do that and we can demonstrate the benefits to the community, it'll become normal practice. Those stretch targets I talked about. We want to achieve 30% canopy cover across our entire precinct. At the moment, it's around 17%. So we've got a lot of work to do. Melbourne City Council has set itself a tree canopy target, I think, of around 40%. So, you know, that's a challenge, but other cities are doing even better than that. It's all possible. And when we look across, looking at aerial photographs of the precinct across Canberra, there's plenty of opportunities to plant trees, I can assure you. Just that we've got a few services in the way which we're going to have to deal with. We also want to make sure that through our practice we can promote low carbon living. We want to help the effort to transition away from fossil gas. We want to do our bit to make sure that certainly in our developments We want to divert organics from landfill. And of course, all our developments will need to promote and support EV charging. That's the way of the future. We need to make sure that all of the developments are future-proof for those opportunities. I'm not going to read all of those statements, but if we get this right, all of those statements represent what success would look like for us. And I guess in all of those you could find examples of that triple bottom line measure that I talked about. Personally, I like the last one, and that is at the Central City Precinct. Our city centre is the instinctive and best space for celebration and protest. I think that's a really important criteria for us. I'm going to now just finish my talk by talking about some things that I think are so important to urban renewal in Australia. How our cities and towns perform in Australia and whether they meet community needs is pivotal not just to the ACT, but I'd argue to all Australian cities and their future prospects. Indeed, it has been argued that cities are the most important single determinant in maintaining our enviable quality of life as Australians, because it is our cities that are producing the bulk of our national GDP and jobs. Ken Henry, the former federal under-treasurer, described them as the economic engines of our nation. I would contend they are also the crucibles of innovation and creativity. So how our cities continue to perform, not just as economies, but as also as places that support all of the dimensions of livability, will be critical. Canberra is already well known for its livability, but maintaining that recognition and the qualities of life that contribute to it will be pivotal to its future prospects as a city. In an article in the Fin Review earlier, I think it was late last week, outgoing Infrastructure Australia boss Philip Davies lamented that Australia needed to make a complete shift in the way it plans cities. He said that we need to change the current culture. Government departments need to be more engaged with the community around what choices they want to have. But he asserted we're still not doing that. We're leading with the infrastructure solution when the community doesn't even know what the problem is that we're trying to solve. He argues for a complete shift in the way we plan our cities. It needs to be place-based and planning-led, not infrastructure-led, Davies said. We live in an age where technology has trumped the tyranny of distance and place no longer matters, or at least that's what many people seem to think. In fact, the opposite is occurring. Place is becoming more important as the world's economies, are transformed by knowledge-intensive activities. Place matters for both prosperity and livability, and for Australia, one of the world's most urbanised countries, that means we need to reconsider the purpose of place. Despite this imperative, I contend that city planning in Australia is still primarily preoccupied with the management of the physical environment and only secondarily with the people who use those environments. Renewing the city is of necessity a multidimensional challenge where economic, social and environmental needs must be balanced in the long-term public interest. Time doesn't allow me to elaborate on this problem in the presentation, but in reality, I'd argue it sets a very stark backdrop for the way in which our cities have been historically planned, developed and governed. In combination, these are also the underlying reasons for an overdue change in the pattern of our urban settlement, from predominantly the outer fringe back to the inner city. A shift which in part is redressing the current imbalance against cultural, social and environmental imperatives which deserve equal policy attention. Whether it will make our cities affordable and equitable remains a much debated question. As a result of a more favourable feasibility equation and a shift in urban policy priorities from the greenfield to the brownfield, renewal is increasingly being used to inject new life and stimulate new possibilities into worn-out city districts. A key factor in its appeal to government is that measuring the before and after conditions against livability criteria is an easier task than measuring incremental change across the entire city. Australian cities typically rank high in those livability indexes and international surveys which measure how well metropolises are performing against their global competitors. Livability is usually a criterion in many of those indices, and like other cities competing to attract inward investment, talent and social capital, so belatedly Australian cities and their condition have been elevated finally to a topic of national political debate. We again have a Minister of Cities. What these league tables fail or struggle to properly measure or value, in what I would argue, are the intangible aspects of city life that can't be quantified but are equally essential for people to not just survive but also thrive. Economic and efficient markets have given most Australians, an enviable quality of life. But when asked what they want from their cities, we frequently cite social interaction, a feeling of connectedness, greater creativity and sensory stimulation. As humankind's greatest invention, cities must meet the social as well as material needs of their citizens. And it's in the cores of our cities, the centres of our cities, that many of these needs must be met. Large-scale urban renewal projects have already and continue to contribute to the place qualities that our capital cities already display. But if these are to be sustained into the future, two related sets of problems would need to be addressed. The first of those is globalisation. Globalisation has not only brought growth to cities, but also prolonged income inequalities. These are increasingly reflected in the concentration of lower income households living in poor standard housing and without adequate social infrastructure close by. Secondly, high growth has associated environmental costs. Rising domestic energy costs are evidence of this trend, and this is set to continue. Good city planning and management will be about maximising choices in the new accessibility era if we are to reverse this haves and have-nots polarisation that we're seeing so much evidence of. Urban renewal in the inner city provides a clear opportunity to close the disadvantage gap, but this requires city governments to be unequivocal on the social planning policy outcomes they want. Yep, thank you. The public and private sectors and the consultants are enthusiastically responding to the challenge of remaking tired or underutilised inner city precincts, particularly in those cities where land in public ownership is available. And proof of this is the rise of the Special Purpose Urban Renewal Agency and of course the creation of the CRA and the SLA in the ACT is local evidence of this. There are many great examples of special purpose urban renewal agencies that have been doing great work over a number of decades. I had the privilege of being the CEO of Southbank Corporation, one of the very first urban renewal agencies created in Australia about the same time as the Darling Harbour Authority, just prior to the bicentenary. And many of these very successful urban renewal precincts display very common characteristics, and they recognise that urban renewal takes time. It demands a commitment to realising what is in the public interest. Future development stages have to have the inbuilt master planning flexibility to be able to adapt to societal and market shifts. All of these agencies who've achieved success have recognised from the outset that priority had to be placed on making the public environment the early and ongoing focus of investment and place curation, in first shifting preconceptions about that place and then attracting private sector interest. The public places we value in cities display many kinds of capital: human, social, cultural, natural and infrastructural. But one of the keys to unlocking the prosperity and leveraging the other forms of capital that cities have available to them is to focus on place. The public places we value the most display this wealth and support its preservation and expansion. Focusing on place for us in the urban renewal process, we firmly believe can build and leverage those other kinds of capital while creating social resilience, stimulating innovation and attracting talented people. It's very important also that we recognise that we want people to come back again and again to these places, and that's why place management's a very important focus for us. It's very important in places such as Civic and Braddon and Dixon, which will require major reinvestment to achieve the standard of urban quality commensurate with their role in transforming our experience of the city. To me, the trick is to stimulate the authentic and spontaneous experiences that are a true hallmark of places that continue to look and work well long after the planners and designers have left. Striking the right balance in how public space is curated and activated certainly requires great skill. Too much or too little can have the equally negative impacts in my experience. One of the core responsibilities in planning cities and making successful places is the facilitation of an interchange of views between the people involved, the séance. All too often, the twin enemies of democracy, as I call them, complacency and consensus, come into play. Because when everything is decided, when dissent is silenced, and alternative renewal solutions are not sought, then genuine citizenship ceases. A truly successful city is one full of empowered citizens who are encouraged to exercise their right and capacity to imagine and present fresh possibilities through innovative planning and urban design techniques, through grassroots structures and social reform, and through the ability to adapt and transform places over time. Urban renewal that embraces this philosophy is about building community within and not immunity from the wider city. My final success factor in renewal is about the importance of creating a strong sense of authenticity, a recognition of the primacy of people and their special relationship to local places, of the accommodation of their needs and interactions, of understanding the historical roots of a location, and the distinct developments of local identity that need to be reinterpreted and re-expressed. This also means guarding against what I call cookie-cutter responses in a dot-com world of brands, fads and franchises. If I was to use a retailing analogy, I suppose it's the difference between the Canberra Centre and Garema Place, or to be blunt, the difference between anywhere and somewhere. A common criticism of renewal projects is that in their singular desire to build an economic brand or image, the development process adopted has led to homogenous, non-place outcomes, indistinguishable and interchangeable with any similar renewal project. Taking the time to observe, survey and interpret the city landscape, its socio-cultural idiosyncrasies, its fine-grained details and stories, and to then embed these in the pre-existing qualities into the renewal vision ultimately ensures a unique place identity is retained or created. Get this right, and the prospect of gaining local community buy-in is significantly improved. I'm optimistic about the future because I'm seeing the wider application of collaborative urban leadership, recognition, as I said earlier, that government should not be solely responsible and that a previously ambivalent public is now more engaged in shaping the urban renewal implementation agenda. Daily media commentary on the state of our cities and the state of our city and the rise of community advocacy groups taking on social and environmental causes are, to me, also clear signs of a genuine concern for the way our city and town centres and the diverse places within them should look and work. Joined up thinking, recognising that renewal done in isolation of other players and in ignorance of other possibilities is a nil-sum game, is becoming the norm. Place success breeds success, and so it is the place users, the public, having experienced firsthand how well their city centres and the places that define them can work when the requisite care and interest is taken by the urban renewal agencies concerned, who are now demanding more. I congratulate CURF for facilitating the public conversation we can find on how we can find and apply the smart renewal solutions that work for each of our city and town centres' unique circumstances. There is no one-size-fits-all approach, but we can and must learn from the successes and failures of other cities' renewals programs. Engaging and collaborating with the whole community to find and deploy locally relevant solutions will be vital to our city's renewal effort. Thank you for listening.